Welcome back to this channel. I hope so far you've been enjoying. In this video, we are going to talk about clay minerals. We are going to talk about clay minerals. Initially, we did mention that clay minerals are products of chemical weathering. We established this fact when we were treating the types of weathering. We made mention that clay minerals are products of weathering. So, whenever the mineralogical components of a rock are being altered by chemical weathering, there is a possibility that the minerals will convert into clay minerals. Now, before we continue, let's look at something we call the clay particle, clay particle, and clay mineral. These two aren't the same. Now, let's consider the first one, which is clay particle. For a substance to be considered as a clay particle, it's supposed to have a size which is less than 0.002 millimeters. So, with this, we can consider so many materials or so many particles as what clay particle sizes, only if they have a size which is less than 0.002 millimeters. But before that particle can be or that material can be considered as a clay mineral, it should be a product of what? Weathering, chemical weathering to be specific. Moreover, it's supposed to also have a size which is what? Less than 0.002 millimeters. Then it's also supposed to be governed by mineralogical what? Properties. So these three characteristics will differentiate a clay mineral from a clay particle. What this means is that most materials can be considered as having clay particle sizes if their sizes are less than 0.002 mm. That doesn't necessarily mean those materials are what? Clay minerals. Now, as part of this lecture, we are going to talk about three main clay minerals, which is the kaolinite, the illite, and the montmorillonite, also known as the smectite. Although there are so many clay minerals, these are the three we are going to talk about in this video. Let's proceed by talking about the building blocks of clays. So this means that let's talk about the constituents of clay, what actually make what the clay minerals. So clays are basically made up of two basic building blocks. One which is the silica tetrahedron block, and the second being the aluminium or magnesium octahedron. So the aluminium or the magnesium octahedron. These two are the basic building blocks of clays. What do we mean when we talk about what do we mean by silica tetrahedron? So if the silica tetrahedron, this formation is by what? An Si ion surrounded by four oxygen ions. So the bonding between these ions, the network they form, is what we term as what the silica tetrahedron, right? So in this schematic diagram, this gray over here is a silicon surrounded by four oxygen ions. So the network of formation that is being formed here is what we consider as the silica tetrahedron. Now, in the case of the octahedron or the magnesium aluminium octahedron, we have an aluminium or magnesium ion being surrounded by six hydroxyl ions. Hydroxyl is the same as the hydrogen oxide, right? So surrounded by six hydroxyl ions. The cation in here is either a magnesium or an aluminium. So the formation or the network of formation between these ions brings about this, right? So the formation over here is what we termed as the octahedron. So in situations where the cation is an aluminium, we call it the aluminium octahedron, and when it's a magnesium, it becomes the what? The magnesium octahedron. So the cation surrounded by six hydroxyl hydroxyl ions, right? Now, what do we mean by tetrahedra and octahedra? Because we've mentioned silica tetrahedra. We've also mentioned aluminium or magnesium octahedra. Octahedra. So what are these two, this tetrahedral and octahedral? What do they mean? So when it's a tetrahedral, what we mean by tetrahedral is that there is a sharing of oxygen ions. So let's go back. So in this situation where we have this silica tetrahedron, there is what sharing. You realize that the oxygen ion surrounds the silicon cation, right? The silicon ion. So in this situation, there is sharing of what electrons. There is sharing of oxygen ions. So this sharing of oxygen ions leads to the formation of what we call the tetrahedral. But in situations where there is sharing of OH ions, which is the hydroxyl ions, such as the one in this case, then an octahedron is being formed or an octahedral is being formed. So the tetrahedral can also be called what the silica sheet, and the octahedral also as known as the what the octahedral sheet. Now we made mention that the cation in the octahedral can be aluminium or magnesium, meaning that in situations where the octahedral with the octahedral the cation over there is aluminium, then we are going to call this octahedron sheet a gibbsite. I'm going to call this octahedron sheet a gibbsite. That if the cation is an aluminium, and we are going to call it a brucite if the cation is a magnesium. Proceed by talking about the formation of clay minerals. So now we've established the fact that clays constituent two building blocks, which is the silica tetrahedral and the magnesium or aluminium octahedra. So now how do these two combine to form clay minerals? That leads to what we call formation of clay minerals. So before clay can be formed, there is a need that this tetrahedral and octahedral sheets bond. So the bonding between the silica and the silica tetrahedral or the magnesium aluminum octahedra, the bonding between the octahedral and tetrahedral sheets forms the clay minerals. Now, so we've also mentioned that the types of clay minerals we have the kielinite, the halite, and the montmorillonite, also known as the smectite. And now we've only given two building blocks. How do these two building blocks lead to the formation of these three clay minerals we are talking about? This is about their proportion of which they are formed. So before we can form these minerals, we need proportions of tetrahedra and octahedra. In situations where the ratio is equal, that's equal proportion of tetrahedra and octahedral sheets, then we have the kaolinites being formed. So let's say a ratio of 1 is to 1, where we have a ratio where we have tetrahedra, one tetrahedral, and one octahedral. Then we have the kaolinites being formed. So let's say 2 is to 2, 3 is to 2, 3 is to 3, 4 is to 4, 5 is to 5. That's equal tetrahedral and equal octahedral ratio. Then we have the kaolinite clay mineral being formed. But in situations where we have higher proportions of tetrahedral compared to the octahedral, let's say 2 is to 1, 3 is to 1, 5 is to 2, 5 is to 3, where we have larger amounts of tetrahedra compared to the octahedron, then we have the elite or the montmorillonite being formed, right? So higher proportions of tetrahedral sheets compared to octahedron sheets will lead to the illite or the montmorillonite being formed. Now let's look at this and it will give a better explanation. The first diagram over here is the kaolinite formation, right? So this gives side this silica. Okay, so this hydrogen bonding. Now let's why hydrogen bonding. So meaning that when I take this first one, when I take this first one, this is my give site, right? So meaning that it's an octahedron, and this is my silica sheet, meaning that it's a tetrahedra. When I take this two as well, this is my octa, this is my tetra, this is my octa, this is my tetra. So meaning when I take the first one, I have a ratio of 1:1. When I take the second one, 1:1. When I take the third one, 1:1. Meaning that a 1:1 ratio of octa tetrahedral to octahedral. That leads to the formation of what? Kaolinite. And the bond formation over there is the hydrogen bond. I'll talk about why it's a hydrogen bond, but before that, let's talk about the other two, which is the illite and the montmorillonite. So in here too, when I take this first part, this is the this is the what? The tetrahedra. This is the octahedra. This is the tetrahedra. Again, octa, tetra, tetra, octa, tetra, tetra. Meaning that what's the ratio over here? 2 tetra is to 1 octa. 2 tetra is to 1 octa. 2 tetra is to 1 octa, meaning that a higher proportion of the tetra to octa, leading to an illite formation. The same thing occurs in the montmorillonite. 2:1, 2:1, 2:1. Higher tetra compared to what? The octahedral. So what differs between the illite and the montmorillonite? Now there is something you should know, that silica tetrahedral sheet, that's tetrahedral sheet, cannot bond together on their own. So let's say I have this a tetrahedral sheet. I cannot have another tetrahedral sheet over here. The bond formation is impossible. If I want to bond two tetrahedral sheets, then there is a need for me to get an external factor. An external factor. But when it's a tetrahedral octahedral sheet, I'll be able to bond them. So now let's look at the first case. Okay, the first case. This is an octa, this is a tetra. Hence, I'll be able to bond them without any difficulty. This is a tetra octa, this is a tetra. I'll be able to bond. And the bond formation, since they are of different materials, hydrogen bonding aids in the kaolinite formation. But when I come to this side, okay, again, here is tetra, this is octa, meaning that I'm not going to struggle bonding the tetra to octa. But when you come here, this is a tetrahedron sheet, this is a tetrahedron sheet. I'll not be able to bond this side together. I'll not be If I want to bond them, then I need an external factor. So it's either I get a metallic ion, right? A metallic cat ion in this case to help. And the metallic cat ion in this case is the potassium ion. So the potassium ion aids in the illite formation to bond the silica tetrahedron sheet. But in that of the montmorillonite, but in situations where cation ions are absent, water aids in this process. That happens in the case of the montmorillonite. It lacks the absence of the cation ions, so water aids in joining the tetrahedron or the tetrahedral sheet, right? So this is the difference between the illite and the montmorillonite. Although they are all formed with higher proportions of tetrahedra to octahedra, in that of the illite, a metallic ion aids in the bond formation of the tetrahedral sheet, and that of the montmorillonite, water aids in the formation. Now, this gives montmorillonite the ability to swell in it swells very well when water enters it. Okay, it has the ability to swell very well, making it highly unstable. Montmorillonite is very high, it's highly unstable and pose so many problems to geological structures or geotechnical structures. So in here we are saying that silica tetrahedral sheet do not bond with one another, just as I explained. And in order to bond them covalently, two silica bonds covalently, we will need a metallic ion, just as I said, and water. Well, so when it's a metallic ion, then we are looking at the elite, and when it's water, then we are looking at what? The montmorillonite. I've also mentioned that montmorillonite is highly unstable, and since it has water ions being it, it pushes the sheet apart, making it of very what have very large voids. So this is how the kyanite looks like. It has a flaky structure. The kyanite has a flaky structure, more like a sheet like, and the montmorillonite has a structure, a honeycomb structure. Now let's talk about expansive clay. So let's take this clay A, B in their initial stages. Now we allow water to seep into these two samples. We allow water to seep into these two samples. We realize that in the final stage, the sample A swells up, that's increase in volume, while sample B increase in volume, while sample A remains the same. Meaning that sample A is what? An expansive clay. Expansive clays tend to swell up when water enters it, or when ions enters it. They tend to swell up. So, and they pose so many problems to geotechnical structures. For instance, if I construct a road with such material and it rains, meaning that whenever it rains, the clay is going to what? Expand, and whenever it shines, it's going to contract. So this expansion, continuous expansion and contraction, can lead to cracks, in the road. This is an example. This is a crack, so it can lead to crack. And so look at this particular road constructed with an expansive soil. Now, when it rains, water enters it, it expands. When it shines, water leaves it, it contracts. So this has caused a major crack in the road, which is costly, it will be very costly to repair this. So as geological engineers, there is a need to study all this in order to do away with such problems when we come across them. We want to talk about the double layer. Now let's consider a clay particle this way. A clay particle. Note that clay particles are negatively charged at the sides and positively charged. They are positively charged at the ends. Also note that the positively charged are what we call the cations, and the negatively charged ones are the what? The anions. So if the clay particles are negatively charged at the sides, meaning that they are going to attract positive ions at the sides. They are going to attract positive ions at the sides, and they'll attract negative ions at the ends. This network of formation, this whole network of formation is what we call the double layer. Is what we call the double layer. Note that the size of this network of formation, which is the double layer, relative to the size of the clay particle, will help you know the behavior of the clay particle in the presence of water. What are the importance of this double layer or this network of formation? I made mention that the size of the network of formation, which is a double layer, relative to the particle size, will help you know how the particle will behave in water. So in this case, meaning that if you know this, you'll be able to engineer the clay. So it governs the behavior of clay. It governs the behavior of clay, and understanding it will help you engineer the behavior of the clay. Moreover, the double layer repels the particles. So when it repels the particles, what this means is that a larger double layer will mean that there's going to be what? Larger voids within the clay. Another importance of the double layer that you are to know as geological engineers is that the thickness of the double layer relative to the thickness of the clay particle will determine how the particle will react with other particles or water. So just as I said, if I have a clay, this side is negative, this side is positive. So meaning that positives will be attracted here, negatives will be attracted here, positive here, negative here. So the thickness of this whole network compared to the thickness of this will let you know how this clay will react with other particles as well as how it will react with water. Now, this double layer again is responsible, or it governs the shrink swell potential of the soil. So the ability of this soil to shrink and swell is dependent on the double layer. Then finally, what I'll talk about is it governs the erosive potential of the soil. Despite the fact that clay being having the double layer or clay poses several challenges to geological structures, doesn't mean that we have to do away with clay. As geological engineers or upcoming engineers, we definitely come across this kind of situation. So how what do we do when we meet such situation? So engineering the double layer. So in such situation, you can go with the lime stabilization of clay, or the geosynthetic clay liner. These are approaches in solving the double layer. So I'll leave this two to you so that you make some research on it, put up your findings, and know how lime stabilization of clay and the geosynthetic clay liner is done. So I'll give you this assignment once again. Try your hands on them. Differentiate between clay particles and clay minerals. Describe the mode of formation of the types of clay minerals. Briefly explain the double layer and give full importance of it. Summarize your findings based on the lime stabilization of clay and geosynthetic clay liner. So you can do this assignment, then you can leave your answers in the comment section, or you can go to the description, tap on the link, join the WhatsApp group, leave your answers there, and we will attend to them. Once again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that any upload you'll be notified. So you subscribe to the channel, then you click on the notification so that you'll be notified. Share as well, like. See you in the next video. Enjoy.